what's your story? Where are you from, and what was that like?
Sure. Well, let me start with my parents. My parents are Iranian Jews that immigrated to the United States in the late 70s. They left during the Iranian Revolution. There was a big, kind of refugee uh, movement coming out of Iran around that time. And they landed in Brooklyn, where I was born, and then we moved to Queens and then Long Island. And my parents really kind of came here with absolutely nothing. That kind of classic immigrant story of coming here with nothing and seizing the opportunity. They did different things in the first few years that they were here, and that they really instilled the entrepreneurial spirit, because I was watching them this whole time, right? And they ended up opening a women's fashion boutique in New York City, and they did that for a while, and then they started their own fashion line, their own clothing brand, and they basically built a factory in our basement in our house in Long Island. And that's where their fashion line came from. And, they would stay. I remember, I was only like in, I don't know, maybe second grade or something, or first grade or whatever. But I remember, sleeping in the basement because I was kind of there was a few stories and I was too scared to kind of sleep alone up there until like 3 a.m. while they were, making clothes. And, there was paint splatter all over the place. It was during the 80s, so like that kind of like glitter and splatter thing was in fashion. And that's how I grew up, watching my parents try and make it. And they were pretty successful. And then my father passed when I was young, when I was around 13. And it was just my mom. And basically, she couldn't run the business by herself. And so I learned from her even more, actually, how to survive, because, she barely had like a high school education. And, she went into real estate, and there were some hard times during that time, but, she taught me a lot during that time of how to become successful in real estate, and always look at the bright side of things, and hustle and not give up, and all the kind of cliche things you hear about, entrepreneurs. And she was like the consummate entrepreneur, actually, and I learned mostly from her. And so, that I think my entrepreneurial spirit growing up came from her. I remember in third grade, I was selling like neon shoelaces to my classmates, because you'd have to go to the city to get them, and they didn't sell them in Long Island, and I was making like $1 a shoelace or something, and then I always had my kind of like my finances on my mind, because it wasn't very stable for me. So I was a bank teller in high school. And then in college, I ended up going to NYU for college, and I moved to the city after that. And I became a web programmer, and I was a TA for for my classes to make money during that time. And after college, I actually tried to go down the traditional path of being a good, like in the structure of what your parents want you to do, right? Like I went to med school, right? And I went to NYU Med, right? And that didn't really last very long, to tell you the truth. I had already kind of gotten the taste of working and hustling and, all that. And I had a roommate at the time who happened to be a friend of mine from high school. And we were living on like 30 something in Park Avenue, I remember. It was really close to the medical school at that time. And he was working at Goldman Sachs, and he was he was like a first or second year at Goldman Sachs. And it was during the dot-com boom. There were, at that time, basically, anything went. And he came up to me and he said, "What are you doing? Let's start a .com together, and I'll get the money and you do the tech, and you know how to do the tech." And I don't know, it took like 3 hours, and it was on a Sunday. And then the next day I didn't go to school, and that I never looked back from there. So that's the like kind of story of how, you know, the growing up and going into business story for me in particular.
I love it. I love it. And I like the story. I want to go a little bit back to your parents, you know, a very, you have like these American immigrant stories. My parents are immigrants from Greece. They come to America. They don't have much. So, you know, they don't want to go back, right? Or sometimes they can't go back in certain cases. And they're there to, you know, they need to thrive. They need to be successful because they've given everything up to do that, right? And I actually lost my father when I was in my teens as well, and I totally understand what happens when, especially the one person, the spouse that makes the most money, is gone, and that whole you know, finance, that line of income just goes away, and you're like, hey, I got to grow up overnight because I need to like make money and help my family out. So I get that, and I think that probably gave you some of your edge of who you are. And might even gave you some financial anxiety over the years, you know, like
It gave me fear. It gave me the fear.
Yeah, of the
It
fear,
really
right?
did.
So
It's that fear. You know, it's funny because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, right? And no matter how successful they are, that fear still exists in them, right? It's in the back of their mind because they remember what it was like, and it really sucks, you know,
yeah,
to kind of, you know, it's constant anxiety. It's almost like an anxiety fire that burns inside you. It's I know exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, sometimes it comes through tragedy, sometimes you're born with it, and I think sometimes, you know, when you build on your own success, you can build it within you, you know. So there's different ways to get it, I think.
absolutely. And so let's talk about college, right? So you followed the typical, I'm going to become a doctor, right? I'm going to med school. And then something happened and you met a friend and you had a friend, you guys decided to start a business together. You leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
What
It was
happened with you?
hard. It was hard. It was hard
What
to decide
happened with your mother? Like now you have to have this
that.
conversation with her. You don't have to go too detailed, but I want to know the parameters of how that went.
Actually, that was in my mind. That was the hardest part, but it turned out to be the easiest part. Telling my mom, and you know, you know, in all reality, she paid for my education. She beat the odds, and she became successful. She became a successful real estate entrepreneur after, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of, you know, really having a very hard time. Um, and you know, and med school is very expensive, as you can imagine. She had already paid for my first semester, so I was pretty anxious about it because, you know, I couldn't go to work and go to med school. That's very hard. But I did kind of make money on the side and paid for other parts of my college during undergrad. I was a computer science major, and I mainly did that because I thought to myself, well, I don't know. I'm always thinking about the worst case scenario, right? Like if I don't get into med school, right, at least I could get a job, you know, being a software developer or something like that. That's what I was really kind of thinking, and it was my fallback plan. It actually turned out to be my main plan, but yeah, that day it was a Sunday morning. My friend from Goldman, my friend who was working at Goldman, was my friend from high school. You know, he would go out Sundays and go to Sunday brunch, right? And I was sitting there drinking, like, you know, in my room reading biochemistry or something, you know, and miserable. And he came to me with this idea, you know, kind of the light bulb went off and made a lot of sense. And I kind of wanted it inside. And I don't know, there was this fear of, look, you know, being pre-med, is a lot of work, right? You got to do all the work for it. You got to take the MCATs. It was a lot of extra work that I had done throughout the years. And I took all these courses that I didn't love. Like I didn't love physics. I didn't love biochemistry. Like I don't know too many people who do, right? But you know, I did it as a means to an end. And I happened to do well at it because of that fear. That same fear that kind of drove me to get good grades and get into med school and stuff. I feel like that same kind of fire of anxiety helped me through, through being an entrepreneur and business. And, you know, and after I kind of like decided, I closed my book and I told my friend I would do it. And then the fear of talking to my mom about it set in. And I called her like an hour later and I kind of beat around the bush. And really surprisingly, she said, I love you. I trust you. I think that, you know, you need to do what you think is right. And that's all I need, you know, like that that sealed the deal for me once she said that. Cause really, you know, you never know how you affect someone with what you say. And it could be your mom, it could be your uncle, it could be your, you know, it could be your neighbor, it could be anyone, right? It could be me who says something right now and it changes something in you, right? And that was it for me at that point. That really kind of switched my thinking.